Hi, this is Hannah,
And this is Charu.
and welcome to episode 6, Gen Zoomers. Today we'll be talking all about the pandemic and the impact that it has on our lives.
Hey.
Wahoo!
All right, so last week we went on tangents about some of our favorite things, but this week we wanted to bring the conversation to the pandemic and just some of the things that we've experienced, especially with the transition to online school.
I think we'd like to start off by talking about the transition into virtual life because we've never had to take there is online classes and all that, but that's not a lifestyle, right? So what was our transition like into virtual life? And I guess we can start off with school and working from home and then talking about our feelings about it.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I know that I am lucky to have a living situation in which I can continue learning online and having a
Yeah.
virtual life.
Yeah.
I was able to transition into it fairly smoothly, but that does not mean that it was easy.
Yeah.
I despised needing to stay inside my house all day and not being able to have the social interaction that campus provided me when I was able to go, which I made sure that I just got out of the house every day and I would stay on campus for hours, even though I didn't have classes prior to the pandemic. I missed all of the things that I was able to do on campus, like just finding random places to sit at, or just people watching as I slaved away while doing my work. And I found it more difficult than I expected it to keep myself focused and on track with school.
Yeah.
I have always prided myself in being self-motivated and self-disciplined, but this pandemic really threw that in for a loop. And it's something that really, I guess it hurt to realize in a sense, because I knew that, I I had felt that, this isn't going to be a problem. I can do it. It's fine. And it just got harder and harder, and I wasn't really prepared for that sudden realization that, oh, no, maybe it's not as easy as you thought it would be. And also that lack of distinction between school and home was just lost on me because I would commute to campus I was a commuter, and so getting out of that house every morning at 8 a.m. and then only getting back around 5:36 was such a was a daily part of my routine that having that stripped away from me, it didn't feel nice. So the transition, although it was smooth, it wasn't easy.
Yeah. I think for me, I agree with that. I think that's sort of my experience as well. Like you said, I'm really lucky and really grateful to be in the living situation that I am in, and being able to have the resources and platforms to be able to continue with virtual life, basically. But like you said, there's no distinction anymore between school and life. And even though I was living on campus the first 2 years, that still there was a distinction because your dorm room or your apartment is your home and it's not school, because your life happens outside of the classroom. And I think one thing was just, I really miss living with people around my age because it's very easy to relate to others that way. And I really miss my roommate. But it is a learning experience of living back at home after you've tasted independence for a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm really grateful because the timing is just really I wouldn't say perfect timing, but it just fell into place. So I was already going to move back home over the summer after spring semester of sophomore year, which was last last year. And I was already going to be living at home to finish off my undergrad degree and all of that.
Yep.
And we had just moved into an apartment, and when the pandemic hit, it was just like, oh, you get to move into with your family now, and you get to move in help settle in the new apartment and
Mm-hmm.
help settle in, like settle all the moving parts and all that. And you get to like settle down with your family
Yeah.
instead of worrying about like all these different things. And um yeah, so I think it's just like timing wise it fell at the right
Yeah.
time, kind of. Not saying that the pandemic is like it was like like
Yeah.
no, but like for it to happen when it happened, like
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But it still was rough, like even though it was kind of smooth, it was still really hard to adjust to not having in-person interactions and being home all the time. And yes, I am an introvert, but I am an extrovert. I'm an ambivert. But
Ambivert. Yeah.
so being at home, yes, it's nice, but then to a certain degree you need to get out as an
Yeah.
ambivert. Yeah.
I think the thing that I like continue to, whenever we brought up like being introverts and how this should be like the best time of our lives and whatnot, because we're sitting at home all day, I'm like, yes, but I sit at home by choice, not because I'm
Not by
forced.
force.
Not by, yeah, I'm not forced. Being an introvert, I I love having my social interactions with my
Mhm.
group of friends. Like I thrive on that. And any decision that I make to stay at home is my decision,
Yeah.
and it's my choice as to when I decide to stay at home and when I decide to go out.
Yeah.
Having that choice taken away from you isn't what an introvert's dream is,
Yeah.
or an ambivert, I guess.
Yeah.
In introverted ambivert, I don't know. So, yeah, what were your initial feelings about the pandemic?
Okay, I'm gonna probably touch on my feelings that I had then and then my feelings now too,
Hmm.
because I don't think we have that question like
No, we
about our
don't. I
feelings now.
we Yeah, we'll do that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess initially I was already mentally kind of prepared. Because back in December or even in January, my parents were already talking about it because we have family in Hong Kong and they have experienced SARS. So my mom, she knows the impact that SARS had and all of the precautions that a lot of people took in Hong Kong because of SARS. And then so when my mom and my dad heard about COVID, the COVID cases in China back in December, they already knew the impact it was going to have, but they didn't know how much it will affect the US because SARS
Hmm.
didn't really affect the US as much.
Right.
Um, but my parents were like, okay, this is going to be bad. Like seeing all the cases in China and then how it has spread to Hong Kong and how it has spread to all of these other countries already. Back in
Hmm.
December and January, they're like, this is going to hit us for sure. So
Hmm.
back then, like my parents were already like mentally preparing us and preparing stuff already.
Okay.
So we kind of had that mindset already, and knowing how our lives are going to change a little. We knew it's going to like our lives were going to change, but we didn't know how much, right?
Right.
So then going into it, I'm like, okay, I expected this already kind of, but I wasn't expecting how much life was going to change, right?
Okay.
And
Hmm.
so I was still frustrated knowing about how all of these plans are going to change
Hmm.
and how I don't get these in-person interactions anymore. And okay, now feelings now. Okay, this might get a little more like heated or emotional, but these past few months, just seeing a lot of news or not seeing news about what's happening in the Asian American community and the Asian community itself. Not a
Hmm.
lot of people know what has happened in the Asian American community. Okay, whew, I might start crying.
Oh,
um, I think it's also because like I haven't been able to express this to a lot of people,
yeah.
but it just it hits home to see like
Oh, you don't have to do this right now if you don't want to. Up to you.
um but like seeing how so many people think that this virus was made in China and people who are of Asian descent have 100% fault, right? But
Mhm.
whether or not you believe that, yes, it was created in China or not, whether or not you believe that, it doesn't necessarily mean that people of Asian descent are at fault, because the people like
Yeah.
like there has been so many since the pandemic started, there's been an increase of violence against Asians and Asian Americans. And it kind of, I mean, beforehand it's hard because a lot of people can't
Okay.
like a lot of people don't distinguish between the cultures in the Asian community. They
Mhm.
say you look Chinese, you're Chinese then,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I don't personally identify as Chinese, even though Hong Kong is technically considered Chinese.
Mhm.
I consider myself Hong Kongese because that's my root, that's my culture, right? So I
Mhm.
am different from like all these cultures are different, right? Japanese, very different. Korean, very different. Malaysians, very different. Singapore, different. All of these people from different roots are very different. Or, yeah,
Yeah.
and their culture is different. And just seeing how the underlying attitudes to Asians in general has been heightened because of this pandemic, it hits it hits home a lot. Okay, I'm like trying
Yeah.
to like process and like I mean, I personally haven't really experienced any like racism in terms of like because of the pandemic or anything like that, but just seeing how the Asian American community has been impacted because of it and nobody talks about it, it's
Mhm.
hard. I mean, yes, like the reason why I guess I haven't really talked about it much is because like I don't know how much I can like how to word this properly, but back in April when so many things were happening in the African American and Black community,
Mhm.
like that hit me hard because like I was so heartbroken because of that, right?
Mhm.
And but now with what's happening in the Asian American community, I don't want I don't want to like
Like diminish what other
yeah,
cultures are going through
yeah, like diminish and say that like
or
yeah, or,
invalidate.
yeah, but I guess more of diminishing. Like I don't want to like diminish what the Black and African American community is going through, like and has been going through, because that's a systematic issue,
Mhm.
right? And I
Yeah.
think the whole thing about being a model minority being challenged right now is a good thing. Like it needs to be challenged, but that's also
Mhm.
a systematic thing,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a big like feel like big what's the word, like this whole thing about like what's happening in the Asian American community and the Asian community is very it shapes a lot of my feelings about the pandemic itself, because I see a lot of posts saying like how the virus is stemmed from Chinese people and because we eat these weird foods and all of that. But when someone uses that to attack, like hit our identity and culture, then it kind of twists it, right? Like,
Absolutely.
how do I word this? Like, people who are from China aren't necessarily bad, and they aren't necessarily like involved in creating coronavirus if you're the one to think that like the coronavirus was created, because I know there are
Mhm.
people out there who think that, but I don't want to like speak about like
Yeah.
that's not my
Mhm.
I don't
I
have
will.
a okay, I'm my brain. But the virus is not a person, and people think that it is kind of like people think identify the virus as Asian.
Mhm.
People from China or people from these Asian countries all have this virus, and it's all because of them that we have this virus. And they extend that feeling to everyone in the descent of being Asian. And that's why I'm really grateful to be living in an area that's very diverse and very, yeah, it is very diverse. But seeing all of the cases in New York, seeing all the cases in California of all of these, a lot of people say they're hate crimes. A lot of people say they're racist crimes. I can't say what it is because I can't speak
Yeah.
into that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just really hard to see your own culture going through that.
Yeah.
And people overlooking it and people saying that like, oh, it's fine, like
It's not fine. Yeah.
yeah, it's not fine. And I think our generation is just I don't know, there was also this thing where it was talking about how Asians aren't considered people of color,
Yeah, I've seen those a lot.
and that's just like I did not want to bring politics, of course, or like bring like heated topics, of course, into our discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, like the whole model minority thing and how us as Asians aren't people of color, it just kind of shoots down our struggles and
Yeah.
shoots down and invalidates our like the culture struggles, right? And like especially talking to my parents about like their struggles coming to America, and like when me and my parents were talking about all the things that were happening back in April and March, like it's just very like how we're not considered people of color is just very weird.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just I don't know, that's like this whole different, like I just went on a complete tangent. But it does shape my feelings about this pandemic because it has a lot to deal, a lot of people tie it to who Asians are, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's why I'm still a little frustrated, and I am still like pretty emotional about it.
Yeah.
I
And I
mean,
mean, rightfully so.
it just hurts to see people labeling us as viruses.
Yeah. I can't imagine what that's like going through that. And like for sure the political climate at the start of the pandemic didn't help in any way, especially with some of the terminology being used, which I think really, I guess, invigorated or inflamed or flamed this type of verbiage. But yeah, I can't imagine what that's like being someone who has never gone through that. And yeah.
I mean, but like your culture too is considered part of the model minority. Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah.
But there's a nuanced difference to it. And but what you are saying about like news coverage as a whole is very different from what, and of course like you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement last year around this time and all of those things, like those absolutely broke my heart, and I'm glad that it got the coverage that it needed.
Yeah.
And that it still needs to this day. But there are protests going on in India right now with the farmers, and there's like brief coverage every so often, but these are topics that should be discussed.
Yeah.
But because it's as though it doesn't, I mean, it in a sense it's not affecting the United States.
Yeah.
And so it's not covered on the news.
Okay, that's like a completely like there's like
that's a whole other story. I know
that like especially with like, okay, this is going to make me emotional again, like what happened in Hong Kong and how and how a lot of the freedoms are being stripped away right now in Hong Kong. Like I have family in Hong Kong, so it hits even harder. And the whole reason why my family moved here is so that my parents wanted us to be able to have freedoms and be able to have a good life and be able to and how none of it was covered. No one was talking about it. No one knew what was happening. And like, I only knew about it because my family talked about it. Not saying that like us, like the US has to cover every single thing in the world, because like it's hard to, because
Yes.
but if the US is committed to, is saying like, is committed to helping the world and globally, I think it has to be aware of so many things, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are so many issues around the world. I mean, what had happened in Hong Kong is still going on right now to this day. And it affects my cousin, it affects my whole family over there. And I'm not going to go into detail about what's happening in Hong Kong, because there's just too much that's happening in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And there's too much to talk about. But I think that's also a frustration coming into the pandemic too. Yeah. So I think the pandemic, all that being said, I think the pandemic has just like forced too many emotions to go on at once, because so many things are going on at once, and then the pandemic just makes you have to think about a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. Oh, no, you're
I'm
good.
so sorry.
Don't ever apologize. Oh my gosh.
I'm so sorry.
No. You're totally good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's important conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah. And it's not a lot of people are aware of it.
No. And a lot of these things, like especially the things going on in Hong Kong, I don't think I would have known about it unless it was for you and another one of my friends who like brought up those conversations when it was going on. And that one says something about me, as well as how news is portrayed. And I think if I'm to jump into what I feel about the pandemic now, is that I am clueless about what's going on around the world. And the pandemic really opened my eyes to that. Not just with COVID itself, but the different things that came up in the same time period. So the Black Lives Matter movement, and now the protests going on in India, and like you just brought up, all of the Asian American attacks. And it's annoying to realize how uneducated I am on certain things. And that's something that it's something that I want to like work towards, but at the same time, it's something that's so difficult to work towards because there's so many emotions involved.
Yeah.
That it's very difficult for me to process all of it at once. And it's a long process that it really struck hard once the pandemic hit. And how uninvolved I felt up until that point. And I guess, so to kind of backtrack a little bit, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was very angry at the whole situation. I was like genuinely, very selfishly, but I was angry at the idea of schools needing to be shut down. And for like, I had just started a project in the lab, and I knew that if schools shut down, then I wouldn't be able to continue that. And I was super excited for continuing a project over the summer. And I was just very like, I was angry and frustrated, and I was like, I'm going to be cooped up inside the house all day, and I don't like that. I need to see my friends. I need to get out of the house. XYZ. I was very selfishly angry. And I didn't understand the gravity of it at first, which I don't think any of us really did, but for sure, like I was like, for very selfish reasons, I was angry at the idea of my just social interactions and my college life. The idea of that being stripped away from me made me like genuinely very angry. And I was annoyed that people were even suggesting that we be extending spring breaks or canceling school or canceling the semester. Like,
Mm.
that idea made me very angry. Now, though, I understand completely.
Yeah.
Like, I absolutely understand why those precautions were to be taken, and I've done like a complete 180 on it, understanding what the situation was and why it was so important for us to
Yeah.
cancel school and like switch to a virtual platform and everything. So
And
those,
then now you're angry with people
now
who
I'm angry
don't
with people who
follow
don't
it.
follow the rules. So I've done a complete 180. But yeah, now that like you bring it up, like I'm very annoyed at the fact that there are still people who don't believe that this is a real thing
Yeah.
and who feel that it's something that, you know, we're just throwing out as suggestions. This isn't a
Mhm.
suggestion to wear a mask.
Yeah.
It's a rule. It's something that you are supposed to be following.
Yeah.
And when you hear health officials say that, and when you hear the stories about what the nurses are going through and what teachers are going through, and just what any frontline workers are going through, it, it's heartbreaking to see that
Yeah.
there are people who don't believe those things.
Yeah.
And that, and also the fact that there are some, even people of science, who aren't 100% on board with
Mhm.
certain things, and how frustrating that is to see that there are people who will believe anything and won't really look into reputability of sources and will just spew information right and left without double checking how it can impact someone else. And then when you see government officials making steps that have no scientific proof to it or scientific backing to it, like it's so it genuine. Like my anger has shifted to something else.
Yeah.
Like, I'm angry for different reasons,
Yeah.
and it's just, and like the amount of fear that that generates is so heartbreaking. Like there are people in my lab right now who are like, when the news came out of a like mask mandates being lifted,
Mhm.
there was one person who was genuinely like afraid of
Yeah.
what that would mean.
Yeah.
Of course, within our lab, like everyone is vaccinated and it's a safe environment within the lab, but there are so many people in public areas that that aren't vaccinated and aren't following
Mhm.
the rules and are going to bars and parties and all of those things. And that just, it's just frustrating. And the
Yeah.
fact that there are still so many people, like we brought up earlier, that aren't educated to understand the implications of what this means and what precautions need to be taken. It's just disheartening.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you see all of the social injustice
Yeah.
and the struggles that students are going through at school,
Yeah.
and how difficult like the job market is and how difficult it is for graduating students. And it it's just disheartening to see how hard this has been for everyone for literally a year now. Like the
Yeah.
1 year anniversary just happened 2 days ago as
Yeah.
we are recording this. And and like it feels like the people who should be looking out for us aren't,
Yeah.
and that just sucks.
Yeah.
To Yeah, to sum it all up, it just sucks. But
I think the pandemic, I think one good thing about the pandemic is that it brought up a lot of things that need to be brought up that wouldn't have been brought up if it wasn't for a pandemic, right?
yeah.
And it invigorated a lot of, is that the word, invigorated?
hmm
Like spurred up a lot of injustices and a
yeah,
lot of issues that haven't been addressed or talked about a lot.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so there is like a good and bad to it. I mean, there is yeah, like you said, like shedding light on these things is very important, and
Mhm.
it's unfortunate the way that it's happened,
Mhm.
but I mean, if it's about time, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think like relating to that, I think all these topics were just a bomb taking to go off until a pandemic is the thing that like made everything just explode and come into the light. And
and there's so many like other, like there's so many health related disparities that are still, you see that with, especially with the pandemic, how lower income communities are being affected more, and how they aren't as educated to understand what needs to be done, and or they're just not able to take those necessary precautions because they're not in the privileged situation that we are in to be able to social distance and wear masks. And it's really disheartening. And I think to go off on that, like our next thing, subtopic sort of thing, was like, what effects of the pandemic, or what are some effects the pandemic has had on our life in general. I think a big part of it is mental health and how it's impacted the two of us.
I think this is a point that you touched on too and talked about, is how like, this is a point that you brought up, how like it's much easier to get burnt out just because we don't have that separation between school / work and life, because everything just happens in the same place a lot of times. Like I do school in my room because my desk is in my room, and that's just how like it's functionally possible, right? Because there's no other room where I can have my desk and set up and all these things and have some sort of privacy, I guess. But yeah, since there's no distinction, it's so easy to get burnt out. And I think I'll mention this again back or later down when talking about like the pros and cons. But I think motivation fits into mental health as well, I think. And for me, the opposite of being, I guess I am burnt out. That's why I lack the motivation. And it's so easy for me to just be on YouTube or Twitch for so long and just not do anything, just because there's no distinction that I'm in a classroom, I'm in a library, or I'm in a place where we're studying together versus I'm at home. It's time for me to relax, right? And there's not that distinction. Like back in school, there was like, okay, I'm in the library or I'm in the study room with my friends and we're studying. We're actually studying. And then I'll go back to my apartment and be like, okay, now it's time for me to unwind. And I watch like an hour of YouTube. That's probably still too much. But yeah, that was like my distinction. But now that's gone. So, and then another big one is that being socially isolated is really hard. And especially for my brain, being socially isolated has given my brain to more lonely thoughts and have the tendency to give into those lonely thoughts, right? But that's why it's so important to stay connected with others, like virtually at most, because that's the most that we can do right now. Unless you go outside and take all the precautions
safest,
and all that.
Safest is virtual.
But I think that's what I found myself falling into too, is having those lonely thoughts. But that's not healthy, because like I said last, which episode was it? I've said it in a previous episode where like we aren't created to be alone. Like we need community and we need people, right? I mean, not to say that like our full faith and reliance is on people, like no, like, but we are created to, we are community people, we are social beings, right? And this pandemic has just like made that really hard to live that. So
I think I 1000% agree with both of the points that you said, that burning out is, it feels like it comes so much more quickly. And that was something that, like I mentioned earlier, it's something that I didn't think would affect me as much, because I have, since high school, I've prided myself in being a very self-sufficient and self-disciplined and self-motivated person. But that being like shaken was something that was very hard to deal with. And I felt especially like even last semester, I felt myself getting annoyed with myself if I realized that, oh, today wasn't as productive, or I didn't get through all my to-do list. Like I wasn't able to cross everything off. And I would feel myself getting frustrated and angry that I wasn't living up to the expectations that I'd set for myself, which it's that, like, yeah, that expectation that I would be okay no matter what, and that online school wouldn't be too big of a problem. That being shaken was something that I had to learn to deal with, and like understand that the expectations that I set were somewhat irrational, considering there was a global pandemic going around. And so that realization that this was a pandemic, and that the stress and the newness of all of this is not what was ever planned for. My idea that I can deal with an online class stems from the fact that, I could still get out of the house, I could still see my friends, but still like have periods of time where I would be taking an online class, but that it wouldn't be my entire day. Made me realize that my feelings of anger and frustration were ever so slightly irrational. And also I personally, I enjoy getting out of the house just as a way to, step outside into the real world as such, and like interact with people that aren't just my parents and my brother, and meet up with friends or have interactions with professors and all of those things. Like that, not having that really was, it was hard. And that, and like virtual, like of course Zoom and FaceTime and all of those things were something that immediately we like started doing, but it's not the same. And even now it's not the same. Like, yes, it's been a year, but I want to hug my friends after I say goodbye to them.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to just say bye and then hit leave meeting.
Yeah.
I don't, it's still hard.
Yeah.
And it's something that I didn't realize how much I depended on it. And I think I touch on this on like the next thing, where it's like, what is something that you realize you craved? Because this is something that I felt myself longing for, that social interaction, that ability to step out of the house and create a separation. And like we mentioned, like, yeah, we're introverts / ambiverts, but getting out of the house is something that I depended upon for my own sanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to say that like I don't love my family and everything. I love them with all of my heart.
Yeah.
But there's only so many months that you can spend with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm grateful now. Like I have moved out for the semester for the research program, and it's been great. But then again, like that loneliness factor, like I like wanted to take myself out on like a little self date this week, because I had a couple of days off, but like with the pandemic, I know that it's not the safe thing to do. And so it's hard. I think it's hard on mental health. It's hard on a lot of things that you don't realize could have been impacted with this until it really happened.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think for me, for like some things that I realized that I've craved and haven't really realized I did until now. I think I took in-person interactions and social interactions for granted.
Yeah.
Because I never knew that would be taken away.
Yeah.
But so whenever all my personality tests are like, or I don't really trust personality tests, but they're just fun to look at. But like all of them are always like 50-50 on whether or not I'm introvert or extrovert. So I always assumed that I was more introverted because I am more socially awkward, I would think. I don't know. But I love meeting people and I love interacting with people. And I didn't know how much that I did until now, until that,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And then structure. Oh my goodness. I thought I like keeping a routine is a little hard for me.
Yeah.
And yeah. But the structure that I did have back in school was good for me. Even though it was sort of a routine, but it wasn't like a like planned
Minute by
out.
minute. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I try to create that for right now in the pandemic because I kind of need structure.
Hmm.
But I can't. I can't.
It's too stressful for me planning things out day by, well, sorry, minute by minute. I can't,
Yeah.
or like even hour by hour. Like
Yeah. So
it's
I just miss that little structure that we had provided to us by school,
hmm.
by
Yeah.
being able to walk to class, being able to eat lunch at a certain time, being able to have all of these things. Yes, there is a schedule now with like this is when you log into class. This is when you start your meeting for this organization, but it's not
Right.
the same.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's less structure in that. And then one thing also one other thing that I've like realized that I love or like craved is like being able to be surrounded by people who are around the same age, same life
Yeah.
stage, um, like living on campus and having roommates. And I'm really grateful for my brother moving back home or coming back home from where he's working, but he was able to work from home because of the pandemic. But then now he is flown back home, and they're staying with us for now. And I really appreciate that, and I love that.
Hmm.
And I know he's probably annoyed by me, but like I've like when it was just because my sister is out living on her own already with
Hmm.
her now husband, so it's like I didn't really have that or another person living at home with me besides my parents. So when my brother flew back, I was like, okay, I've really missed this. I've really
Oh,
been missing like
yeah.
being able to interact with someone else, play games with people, do things with people,
Yeah.
and all of that. And then one last thing that I realized that I like took for granted is being able to study with people in person and having
Mm.
study sessions in like the living room or in this
Yeah.
study room or anything like that. And now it's harder because you can't replicate that, but we
Yeah.
try our best with Discord and the music bot and
Yeah.
texting people asking them if they want to study. But that's the only way I get my work done is when I study with other people. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of things that I miss that, you don't, yeah, like you said, that you just take for granted. Like being able to sit at Starbucks on campus and like
Hmm.
just have that like coffee house vibe going behind you, but you're able to be semi-productive.
Hmm.
Um, or like being able to look at the trees while you're studying outside. I mean, that's
Hmm.
still possible, but it's not
Limited.
convenient.
Yeah.
Like on campus, you have tables and benches outside for you to do that.
Hmm.
It's not as easy now, and there's so many other things that you have to think about before you can like step out
Yeah.
of the house. You can't just walk out and be like, oh, I'm going to the park. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, do I have my mask? Do I have hand sanitizer? Do I have XYZ? Do I have this?
Yeah.
There's so much planning that goes into it that it takes away the simplicity of it,
Yeah.
and that's something that I miss.
Yeah. So I guess after or another topic after what we've craved is something that what is something that you've learned because of this pandemic or
um
during this pandemic? Both.
Both, yeah. So for me, again, it's kind of going back to the idea of productivity, but for one aspect is attached to productivity where it's okay for you to have off days or several off days in a row. It's fine. You don't always have to be productive all the time, and things aren't what we expected them to be, and it's not in our control. All we can really control is how we look at things,
Hmm.
and understanding. I think a part of it is like this doesn't always help when I'm feeling down, but like realizing the privileges that I have.
Mm.
and how lucky I am to be in the situation where I'm at is
Mm-hmm.
almost has been necessary for me to like pull myself away from falling into a rabbit hole that just spirals and really think back to what life is really like for so many other people. And and also that, you know, so maintaining social interactions are important, and it's something that I do thrive on. And another thing is, again, just taking care of your brain and your mental health is something that's necessary, and it's not something that comes naturally to me, and it's something that I have sort of continued to work on, but the pandemic really enforced the need to work on it. And also, to this one, it just popped into my head, but the pandemic has taught me that not everyone can be trusted when it comes to officials
Mm.
slash people of science. Just information that is being presented can't always be trusted, and it's something that you need to read about on your own and not just
Mm-hmm.
take things as stated. That's
Uh-huh.
something that, like, up until June of last year, like, it's not something that we really think about, because up until then you're like, okay, this is what's being told to me, this is correct, etc., etc. But then things were being said, it's like, oh wait, that doesn't make any sense. We're gonna start questioning what you're saying. And that is something that the pandemic really brought into light.
Mm.
And yeah, that, and also just there's so many problems in the world that we don't know and that we don't see. And it's important to, I feel like it's important to never lose sight of that. Yeah, I think those are top three things.
Mm. Yeah. For me, there's so much that I've learned too, but one thing is like it's okay that plans change. So I've kind of learned to be more flexible in what happens in the outcomes and how there's so much that's not in my control. So there's no need to have everything figured out. And it's okay if things don't happen how you expected them to happen because things just can take a turn where things can change. Um, and another thing is that the pandemic has kind of forced me to learn how to be more intentional
Mm-hmm.
and I think it kind of goes back into when I was talking about like my lonely thoughts or having lonely thoughts. Like it's a, it's a balance between like not falling into that and being intentional. But yes, it's hard to be intentional a lot of times, but this pandemic has kind of forced me to kind of look at being intentional in a different way and yeah, and to reach out to people and to not be as scared to reach out to people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think another thing that is more general, that's not as personal, but still is personal because this is kind of relating to the field I'm going into. But I've never really realized yet, like going before the pandemic, like I knew that people who had hearing impairments had a lot of difficulties, and when you're communicating with them, like you have like they rely on your lips as well,
Mm-hmm.
um, and having a mask thrown into that, and it just makes their life so much harder now. And I think in my class, yeah, in my audiology class, we were talking about how much noise a mask attenuates. So it's up to 10 to 12 decibels, which makes a big difference. Based on this chart that I'm looking at right now, a 10 decibel difference can be from a quiet office to a normal conversation. And think about that big difference. A quiet office is like quiet, right? You just hear
Mm-hmm.
typing and phones ringing and some people talking, but
Yeah.
it's not like right next to your ear and you don't hear it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But then 10 up from 50, 60 decibels is a normal conversation. And that's already loud. Or not
Yeah.
loud, but like is audible, very audible. So imagine that 10 decibel difference. It makes a big difference. And it's just it hits harder for those who have hearing disability or hearing impairments and learning disabilities too, because a lot of the learning disabilities and communication disabilities rely on sound and
Mm-hmm.
rely on being able to hear others.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has not helped
Yeah.
at all. And I think in a way it kind of reminded me to be patient with everyone around me. And everybody is struggling in different ways. Like we don't know how another person is struggling or it in life in general,
Mm-hmm.
aside from this pandemic, right?
Yeah.
But in this pandemic, everyone is struggling, right?
Correct.
Not saying that everyone isn't struggling aside from life, because in
Yeah.
life everyone is struggling.
Right.
But because of this pandemic, everyone is struggling. And it has just forced me or reminded me to be patient with others, be intentional, and reach out to people and ask how they're doing, because it's hard to, the pandemic's just hard.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
those are some things that I've learned, and I'm sure that I am continuing to learn more and have learned more, but yeah. Okay, next thing.
Next thing, virtual school. We've kind of hinted on, obviously, we all know that things switched to online. So, what are we'll start with the positives. What are some pros that you have seen with virtual school?
I think one big thing of that, I guess this was also a question from one of our listeners, is like, even though it's been difficult, what's like your favorite part about it, or what do you like about it? And this goes into what I'm about to say, is like, I think being able to hide behind a screen, kind of like, and have my camera off for those classes where the professor doesn't ask us to keep our cameras on, it allows me to be more gutsy, not gutsy, but have more confidence to like use the chat box to ask a question or to make a comment on something that I wouldn't normally have done in a class, because there's not that social pressure as much. You don't see it, you don't you feel it, but I mean, I still get like nervous typing in the question and be like, oh no. But yeah, so it's easier in that sense. And for me, it's a little more flexible, where it's easier to take some things at our own pace. Like if it was a complete asynchronous class where we can take it on our own pace, it's nice, but there's actually so many cons from that.
Yeah.
I will list them later. But yeah, and then I think those were my main points.
Yeah.
Pros.
And I think aside from what you just mentioned, like, yeah, all of those I agree. And I think in a sense, it's sort of easier to get your friends to hop onto a Discord together or like a Zoom session, because like you're all in the same place in the sense that you're all online.
Yeah.
And so if you're free, like, on campus, it was like, okay, I've got class from 2 to 4, but then my friends were free from like 12 to 2. Or wait, no, I have class from 2 to 4, my friends had class from 12 to 2, but like we were never able to like hang out. Like you and I had that problem because our schedules just never really matched up.
Yeah.
Because of like, we had to be in class.
Yeah.
Now that it's less of that, because so many of my lectures personally were done like asynchronously, so I had more time in the day and I could like, just ask someone to like get on a Zoom call with me and we would just be productive together. So that's like the one pro that I can think about that I really like got myself accustomed to. And like the flexibility is nice. Also, like in response to our listeners' question about what was one thing that the favorite part about this pandemic, is that I can take a nap whenever I want to, because my bed is like sort of right next to my table, which isn't the smartest thing to have. Not the smartest setup, but it's the setup that made the most sense inside my house.
Yeah.
But like, and also, you know, we can roll out of bed whenever the heck we want. And like, I had an
Mm-hmm.
8:30 class, I could get up at 8 and just like show up. Or if I was very tired, I could just take a nap during class because the class was recorded anyways. So I can actually, that's one really good point. The recorded lectures, it's something that, I mean, not, I didn't make the most use of it, but being able to like go back to the lectures
Yeah.
or like slow it down to my pace if needed or speed it up, which was more often than not the case, it's convenient because you can make studying your own, yeah, you can make studying
Yeah.
your own thing.
Yeah.
And like taking lecture notes and all of those things was slightly easier, but
Yeah.
it's no substitute to learning biochem in person or
Yeah.
PChem in person. Like
Yeah.
my classes just, they just don't translate well into online. Like a
Mm-hmm.
lab class online, like I didn't learn anything. That's, I mean, I'm just going into cons because honestly, like hate, I don't want to be the, what, negative Nancy, is that the term? I don't know.
I don't know.
No idea, but it doesn't translate well. Like lab classes, math classes, science classes, you want to be there to engage well, especially when they take it into an asynchronous thing. That just really strips away any interactions that you can easily have when it comes to learning material. Because it
Yeah.
adds more, especially with asynchronous, it adds more pressure when you want to ask a question because you're not able to just voice your question in the chat or unmute yourself. You have to set up an office hour, and that adds so much more pressure because it becomes more formal, and it's just it's it's difficult in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
to get your questions across as well as to connect with other students and professors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that taps into my cons
Yeah,
too.
sorry, yeah.
No, no, you're good. You're good. But I think that going back to the pros, like, and
Yeah,
relating it to our listeners' question, um, one thing that I love is like being able to see pets. Like, you sometimes you just see cats like walking across their professor's screen or like a classmate's screen, or like you just see a cat attacking
oh my gosh.
someone, or like
Yeah,
a dog just like trying to do something and all that. It's so funny. I love it.
that's true. Like
Um,
that is one joy to it.
yeah, and like
Yeah,
it dives like you can be more personal too, because like you
yes,
see each other's lives
for
basically.
sure.
But
Yeah.
like in person, it's just like, oh, here's
Okay,
the
hello,
information.
your person. Hi.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Okay, so then for my cons, yeah, it's just hard that things are all virtual. Yeah, like we said, like we like having in-person interactions and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you touched on it, like connecting with others and connecting with professors is a lot harder.
Yeah.
Um, it's much harder to stay motivated. I think you touched on
Yes.
that too. That goes back to my pro about like things you can take on your own pace. It's actually it's a pro, but then there's cons to it where motivation is hard,
Mm-hmm.
very hard. There's less structure, of course, and yeah, I'm always
Yeah.
taking breaks, which is bad. I mean, bad in the sense of I'm not motivated.
Yeah. Or the opposite, where
Yeah,
you don't give yourself a break because you can just sit at your desk all day and do work.
not me. I take too many
It
breaks.
was like sometimes me and then other times not me. So like I was
Yeah,
on both ends of the spectrum, which
yeah,
yeah, finding the balance, that's something that's difficult.
yeah.
Right.
I guess going into tips on virtual schooling and virtual learning, what are some tips that you have?
I think the one of the main ones that I put down was like talking to your friends, engaging with them, interacting with them. It's a lot harder in Especially when you're in a class where you don't know anyone and it's all virtual, it's very difficult to
Yeah.
make new friends. So having those like class group me's are really, they're a way for you to interact, or just, maintaining that conversation with your already existing friends is also very important and necessary. And this is ever so slightly nerve-wracking, but setting up one-on-ones with professors that you want to get to know better is also like a tip that I would share. It's something that I did like a couple times, maybe not enough, but that will allow you to, one, engage with the professor, let them get to know you, and you can also get any of your questions that you had across to them, that you're somewhat shy or unable to get across during lectures, if you have live lectures.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think a big one is, I guess, I don't know if it's a big one. Like routine, it's really hard to stick to a routine during this time,
Yeah.
but have some sort of schedule, like a close to a schedule as you can. Like
Right.
it can be like scheduling a call weekly with someone,
Mm-hmm.
or having a set time where you're studying with someone at that time and be like, okay, at 7 or 8:30 p.m. we're hopping onto the Discord for this much time, and this is what we're going to do for this long. Yes, it seems unnatural because that's not how we operate in person, because
Yeah.
a lot of things are spontaneous in person. Be like, oh, you want to study? Okay, let's study. Or like,
Yeah.
hey, you want to grab dinner? Okay, let's grab dinner. But like, that's very hard to be spontaneous now.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think like having those scheduled, like yeah, I think having those scheduled times to like for things is important. But it's hard to have like a like hour by hour schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I would say don't do that because it just adds too much pressure. But if it works for
If it works
you,
for you, then
it
go for
works.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're not one to stick to a routine like me, like I can't do hour by hour, then don't do it. Because if
Yeah.
it was difficult for you to do that, it was difficult for me to do that when in person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it was very difficult for me to do that in person, it's going to be 10 times harder to do it when you're
Yeah.
in this situation, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Walking and
Yes.
exercising.
Yeah.
Very important.
Getting out of the house.
Yes. It's not something that I'm necessarily good at, like going exercising, but like going out of the house is very important. Like I love when we go out, even though it sometimes cause me to get very nervous or
Yeah.
worried. Sometimes, like being like, people wear a mask, or
Uh,
oh no, yeah, yeah. But walk, exercise, get your body moving. We're sitting down too much. I'm speaking for myself there. I'm sitting down too
mm-hmm.
much.
Same.
And not moving. It's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so I think those are our main tips. Anything else
Yeah.
to add?
Anything else to add? I feel like I had something that popped into my head and then just walked away.
Oh, my bad.
Not, nope. Oh,
Oh, huh.
just take time for yourself.
Yeah.
Also, like we have mentioned several times, this is hard on all of us and it's not normal. And it's just take care of yourself, whatever that may be.
Yeah. So now we're going to jump into questions that we've got from listeners and followers. Thank you, everyone, for those who have asked us questions. Keep those questions coming because these
We
questions are
appreciate.
really, yeah, we do
Yeah.
appreciate them because we get to know what other people are thinking about and want to
Yeah.
know about.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Also, they
and,
get us thinking too.
yeah. Yeah.
Thinking about one specific person. You know who you are.
Yes. Okay. So, first one, how do you maintain good mental health while having to isolate?
this is something that we have touched upon throughout the episode, I think, but also, you know, continuing to connect with others virtually, or if you can, like socially distanced hangouts and things are very good ways to like make sure that you're staying sane. Also, doing just whatever makes you happy: art, journaling, reading, sitting on YouTube for 5 hours a day. All of those
That's not
things.
necessarily good
It,
because you're running on empty by
I'm
then.
not saying that
Yeah.
it's, you know, sometimes it's just what you need.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not saying do that every time that you're
Yeah.
down in the dumps. I'm just, if that's what you need that day, it's fine.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, yes, that's not the healthiest coping mechanism, but sometimes it's just you just don't want to shut your brain off completely and just consume chaotic content. And you know, YouTube is a great place to fall down that road.
Yeah.
But doing the things that make you happy, getting outside, creating things, reading about things, or just reading for fun. That's something that I find myself craving more and more. Um, and once the pandemic hit, we, like my friend and I, we had like a little mini book club situation going, and we read, I think, 5 books over the summer. And then I've just continued trying to read more because it's something that I love doing. And what better time than now when I'm sitting at home all day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are my two main things.
For me, it relates to like going outside and all of that. So don't just stay in all cooped up because like I said, we are social beings. Like it even includes like taking a trip to the grocery store or a park or just outside in the backyard.
Yeah.
Like that is good. Like having a change of scenery is good.
Yes.
Yeah, and then like going back to like connecting with others and but like socially distant, a really good activity that I found that has been really nice to do is just throwing a frisbee around with a friend because you have that distance.
Yeah.
But even though you stop the yell across and be like, hey, yeah, but like if you're following all precautions, then it's totally fine. Like that's and throwing a frisbee is so fun. Actually, I didn't actually notice how fun it was until me and my friend did it. Like back when I was younger, I was so scared of it because like I don't want to hurt myself. But I mean,
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think when you say change of scenery, that's another good thing. The point that I wanted to bring up, once I realized that I would be spending the entire semester at home, sitting in front of the same blank wall, actually, that's a lie. My wall was not blank.
Yeah, no.
But I realized that, you know, I was going to be sitting here staring at it for months on end, and I wanted to change it up so that it's something that whenever I looked up, it would bring me some joy. And so customizing your space and your setup to be functional for you as well as motivating is something that it in a way helped my mental health, to where like I didn't hate my setup. And it was also just a way for me to sort of get creative and make myself ever so slightly motivated to continue doing my work, because it was just inspiring in a very artistic sense. And yeah, being able to customize your space if possible it's fun. Yeah. Another question that we got, which really made me think, was what has the pandemic actually taught you to leave behind?
For me, it's really similar to one of the questions we talked about in what were some things that we've learned because of the pandemic. And I think to reiterate it, I guess, like I've learned to let go of certain expectations and let go of control because there aren't a lot of things that I can control. So I think that's like the main thing that I've learned to leave behind and to let go of. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think same with me that it's the idea of, or it ties back to one of my other answers, where the idea of needing to have only good days and to avoid bad ones because bad ones means you weren't good enough. Like that idea, like this was something that I was continuing to work towards, but the pandemic really drove that in. And
Mm,
also, there's like no point in waiting for that, for the perfect moment to start doing something. If you have something that you want to do, get at it because you never know what's going to happen.
yeah.
I they're just the smallest things, you know. I wanted to go to more local coffee shops after a day on campus and just continue doing work there. I went to one on March 9th, and that was that.
Oh.
Um, so like, but this was something that I had been thinking about for like the entire semester and like previous
Mm-hmm.
semesters too, but I just kind of put off. And so
Mm,
now it's like there's no perfect moment. You just have to do it.
mm-hmm.
Um, and another thing is things are out of your control, and there's no point in trying to plan out every single step. Things will happen when they need to, and it'll be for better or worse, but that's not in your control.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, this one also I touched upon, but it's to just not believe everything that's being told to you because it's not always accurate. That's something that the pandemic really brought into light, that, and it's something that I hadn't really, like, it's something that I knew that I would need to learn to do, but it's not something that I thought would happen at this stage, um, which is sort of gullible to have that mindset that, you know, oh, I can trust what's being told to me because
Mm,
people are, the people that I'm interacting with are well educated and are like looking out for the best for me. But it it's just something that like it didn't click until the pandemic started that that was something that I needed to start doing. And so
mm-hmm.
yeah, thinking for yourself is something that the pandemic taught me, and like leaving behind the idea that everyone is whatever is coming out of someone else's mouth is fact is something that I had to leave behind. Um,
Multiple
from the people,
sources.
yeah. So whatever is coming out of people that I trust
Mm-hmm.
trusted isn't actually fact is something that I had to leave behind. Like I know that, you know, other external sources, yes, it's important to double check. That is
Yeah.
something that we are taught from day one. But when it's someone that you have interacted with and have put your trust in that they are giving you proper advice and things, when that is broken, like that idea was something that really, like,
Mm.
it was new in a sense. So leaving behind that blind faith.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And our final question, I think we already yeah,
Yeah.
we've already touched about it, about like,
Yes.
even though it's been difficult, what's your favorite part about virtual learning?
Yes.
Yeah.
Leave.
And then I guess to finish it out, a very big public service announcement. To touch upon, we are going to have we're going to release a mini episode in the coming weeks, talking about the pandemic or COVID
Mhm.
itself, and putting things more in layman's terms and all of that. And so this general public service announcement is just a general one. We will dive deeper into our mini episode. I will call it 6.5. But yeah, please continue to wear masks, practice proper hygiene, wash your hands constantly, even though, yes, your hands get dry. Wash your hands, lotion. Yes. And practice social distancing. None of this goes down the drain until COVID is eradicated, which is probably
Or until
forever.
we are, yeah, like the likelihood of COVID going away is very small, but
Yeah.
once the majority of the population is vaccinated and is fully vaccinated, we can slowly think about uh, lifting these guidelines. And on that
Mm-hmm.
note, even though some states like Texas have lifted their mandates, please continue to follow safety precautions established by health officials, not only to protect others, but to protect yourself as well, because this isn't a disease that only affects those around you. It can affect you, like we will go into in our next mini episode. We aren't invincible.
Yeah. And yeah, just be cautious, be aware, use common sense. Don't do anything that you would question whether or not like it's unsafe, because the fact that you're questioning it can say something about it. Like partying or going to bars or going to really crowded areas. Yeah. But a last point, it's cool to wear a mask. You don't look stupid. You will look stupid if you don't wear one. :D smiley face. Yeah, but those were just our general PSAs,
because we feel like we need to, as citizens and as just people living through this, we need to make it aware. But yeah, with that, we'll wrap up this week's episode. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see y'all in our little mini episode maybe next week. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Bye! If you have any questions for us, feel free to email us at rewritethetimespodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at Rewrite the Times.